Your mic's on if you didn't know.
I knew.
Okay.
Good morning.
I'm in a bit of a situation.
Uh-oh.
Bruh, be careful driving and zooming.
I rescued a dog and I'm driving him to the shelter.
Oh my
Oh.
God.
Oh, okay then.
That's what's happening right now.
Well, that's
What a
good-
lad. What a giant lad.
This is what's happening. This is how my morning is going.
Oh, okay.
Find the
Well,
dog.
yeah. I think he should get all the credit. He's saving the dog. I think that's immersive media.
That's truly immersive.
That is truly immersive.
Hello.
I finished my workout. I was going to the grocery store, and then this pit bull jumps out of nowhere and leaps into my arms.
Oh.
And then I'm like, what do I do? So I called the shelter. He's a male pit bull. He's really young. Doesn't look like he's eaten in a bit. So I called the shelter and I got an appointment. So now I'm driving him 45 miles to the shelter.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's great. That sucks for the dog. That sucks, but it's also very wholesome. That's it.
Yeah.
I have a question, Miles.
Yes.
Are we doing the presentations today, or are we doing
No,
them
we're gonna
on
do them
Wednesday?
in section, in recitations. Yeah.
Okay, that is good because I'm still putting finishing touches and that stuff. It's just I don't really work on
Other
my
Quinn, you're not muted.
What?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's just I noticed that the other Quinn in this class is not muted.
Yeah, I
Right.
know.
Yeah, he was talking. That's right.
My bad.
That's
I
right.
was talking. Hello, Other Quinn.
Hello.
I was just putting some finishing touches on it. I'm actually, So I'm gonna, cause I only work on the stuff in the lectures. Like I tried doing it like not in the lectures, but it's a weird thing that like I don't think of anything. So it's only been like in the lectures. I've been like designing this and I've been doing it on a laptop. So I'm like, and I have a very shaky hand on the laptop because I'm using a trackpad. So
Cool.
I'm like, all right, you know what? It's the final day 2 days before presentation. I'm going to bring this up on my desktop so I could actually use a wireless mouse and everything to make it somewhat good. Still not going to be really good, but yeah. So yeah, I'm probably going to be talking in the chat, but I'm mostly going to just be doing this.
Great.
And it has to be does it have to be 5 minutes? Like exactly, or can it be under?
Good question. Jeffrey's here. I just saw Jeffrey.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello there, Jeffrey.
Good morning.
So the question is, does it have to be 5 minutes?
Oh, are we talking about the presentations?
Yeah, I was
Or
just saying. I was just saying that I'm not really going to be talking this time. This is the only time I'm going to talk because I'm working on the finishing parts of my presentation.
Oh yeah, 3 to 5 minutes, I would say.
3 to 5 minutes. Okay.
Yeah,
That is good because I was looking at it. I was like, go on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
In my experience, most people who are worried about 5 minutes being too long, every time they give a presentation, they go way over 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So if I were you, I would just test it and time yourself.
All
The
right.
presentation.
Because every time
Sorry,
I've had
just check it.
just a funny
Sorry.
piece of wisdom that every time I've had a student who was worried about being too short, they always went too long.
Yeah.
I totally second that, Jeffrey.
Yeah, so it's good to. I would say one thing to do is, Miles? Did you introduce Did you talk about?
We didn't actually.
presentations, we just kind of jumped into this.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
somebody else had a question.
Well, why don't I talk a little bit about the presentations in general?
Okay. Okay.
Say hello.
Yes.
Intro the class, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do today, and we'll have some time for talking about the presentations too. Does that
All
sound
right.
good?
Yeah.
Cool. So let's see here. Maybe I can actually jump into Figma, or maybe I'll use the page right now. Let's see. Beautiful. So on your recitation for this week, there is going to be what we're calling a show and tell, basically. And the show and tell is 3 to 5 minute presentation of your notebook. So it's a kind of a share screen situation, right? You're going to be asked to do it, to share your screen. If for some reason you can't share your screen, or your setup is making that hard or something like that, then the idea would be that you send your Figma file to the chat. You send your link to the chat, and then the teacher would open that file and you could kind of remotely direct them or something. Does that make sense? So if you have to do this kind of Figma to chat thing, then the suggestion there is to make sure that you make it clear for whoever's running it, what page to go on. So in Figma, you might want to separate your pages out to be like 1, 2, 3, and be like, oh, could you please switch to page 2 now, right? So just understand that if you're not going to present it yourself, you have to do that. But I would say, even if you're going to present it yourself, you should also do this. So you should set up your document in such a way in which you're like kind of going through each page, or if you're kind of more of that sort of, sprawly type notebook person, what I would recommend is just carving a path out for yourself. So one thing you might want to do in a presentation is like really just, be kind of, I would say be kind of dumb about it. Like look at what you have in your notebook now, and then basically I would just draw like blue circles in all the places where you want to present or share something, right? And that way, and then just put a number next to those circles, like number 1, number 2, number 3. And that way, like, okay, so maybe on page 1, you have circle 1, 2, and 3. Page 2 is circle 4. So you can kind of build a little slideshow by navigating through your notebook. And this won't only help you know where you're at, but this will also help the people who are watching the presentation understand that you actually have a plan and you're kind of organized. So one part of this presentation is like, of course, go between 3 and 5 minutes. Another part is like, try to map out how you might want to share. So you want to kind of carve a hiking path through your notebook so that it's not an experience of you kind of just browsing aimlessly and talking about things. So we do want to see like a structure for the show and tell, if that makes sense. But the structure that you use kind of would come up to you, would sort of be up to you, right? So this one here is kind of a spatial structure, and this one here is kind of a linear structure, just going 1, 2, 3. So it depends on what your notebook is. And the other thing I would recommend is you have the stuff in your notebook, but then you also might want to just know what order you're doing things in and maybe what you're going to say. So it's only 3 to 5 minutes. And so I would just, on a piece of paper, be like, okay, number 1, I'm going to talk about my sketches. I'm going to talk about how I got an iPad this year. Number 2, I'm going to talk about this class project that I used the notebook to help organize. Number 3, just like a basic kind of reminder list, right? Because often when you're looking through a bunch of material, like you're showing your sketches, before you know it, you're past 5 minutes and you're still on number 1. You see what I'm saying? So just try to kind of create a little map for yourself so that you can show us everything. That would be sort of my recommendation. Yeah, I don't think that we're going to have I'm switching back to my face. I don't think we're going to have a situation where like everyone goes and then we like critique your notebook after the presentation. We're just going to kind of go through each person who's present in the class, like one after the other, and maybe there'll be just some discussion after that. But the whole goal for recitation this week is to try to just get through everybody's presentation. So it should be kind of fun. It should be interesting. The things that make it not fun and not interesting is when someone gets lost technical things don't work, you know. So try to just like think about like, okay, what are my capabilities? Have I shared my screen on Zoom before? If this is the first time, be prepared for maybe it not to work, you know, just kind of like try some stuff out. And if anyone wants to, you know, if you haven't shared your screen before on Zoom or something, you can try it in this class, or, you know, just like feel free to like to play around. But yeah, so I guess that's sort of the presentation. Is there anything I'm missing out
Well,
on, Miles?
you know, I think that was great, because you really kind of hit on the idea of structure. And so,
Yeah, that's kind of the point of what we want you to be thinking about. It's like the notebook has a structure. Presentations all have a structure. That structure might be a little bit different.
mm-hmm.
So come up with a nice one.
And so it actually segues pretty nicely into what we're going to be talking about today, with story, you know, a narrative. That when you're doing a presentation, you're basically telling us a story, and that structure that Jeffrey's talking about is really important, and that 3 to 5 minutes is actually a really short presentation. So just as Jeffrey said, that the challenge is going to be to keep it under 5 minutes, you know, for most people. It's almost like if you show us 3 pictures, that's probably going to take you about 3 minutes there, roughly, you know, depending on what you have to say about it. And so you can think about it as, you know, as we'll be talking about in a little bit, you know, kind of act 1, act 2, act 3, and then get off the stage kind of a thing. Make it easy on yourself by thinking of that structure ahead of time, I think, you know. And you're what do you have to say about your work? And a lot of times we don't necessarily know what to say because we haven't thought about it that way. We make something, and that doesn't mean we've thought about what we made. And so this is a chance for you to kind of reflect and look and think about, okay, you know, what do I show us what it is? And the biggest thing to remember is that we haven't seen it before. Whereas when you're making it, that's all you're doing is seeing your own work. So it's hard to get into that place where you've got to present something, but you have to be a stranger to yourself. You have to imagine yourself in the audience's shoes.
Yeah. And, you know, those of you who really want to think about it as a presentation, you can also consider the fact that, oh, maybe I'm not going to show my whole notebook. Maybe there's just this one piece that I've put in my notebook and maybe I'll briefly pass through my notebook to get there, but there might be one thing in your notebook that you've really done that was interesting that you really want to spend most of that time on. So it could be like 30 seconds to a minute overview of my notebook, 3 minutes, all about one thing, one piece, you know. So it's kind of up to you how you want to focus that time, I think.
So maybe
as long as it's something that you kind of made this term or that you're thinking about right now.
So maybe just kind of looking at this beginning, middle, end structure here that you've got there, you know, you could think like in the beginning, you're saying, well, hey, you know, my name's Miles Inada, and I just wanted to give a broad overview of my notebook. And this is basically what it looks like, you know, and you're showing us some stuff and over here. And then the middle section might be, but I'd really like to focus on this particular aspect of what I've been doing, you know, animation design, character design, something like that, or some logo or this photo essay that I did, or a particular collection of my work, and what I'm excited about. And, you know, and then the conclusion, you might say, you know, yeah, and so I'm excited for X next, or, you know, this is where this goes in the future, or, you know, and then you're done. You know, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that, you know. And so, but thinking about that a little bit of structure will take you a long way, you know. That you're not telling us your life story. You're not telling us everything about every single thing you've done. It's just kind of picking a couple of little highlights you want to hit, and then it's like, ta-da! Yeah, that's great. Here, let's pin that up. Yeah.
So here's an example of a presentation. So not to use not that Miles is I'm not calling Miles a procrastinator or anything. But just, you know, but, you know, the beginning, you know, introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Miles. Middle, here's a comic I'm making. I'll add a little bit of a
Oh yeah,
more,
cool.
more idea of comic in
Yeah.
the diagram. And then so that might be like drilling into, oh, this is like all the pages that I have, this is the story that I have, this is blah 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 blah, right? And then the ending, uncertainty. I've been working on this for a while. I don't know when it's going to be done, or will this ever be done? And kind of, it's okay, but just the idea that it's okay, and often really, really great. It's a great rhetorical tool to end your presentation with the question. Be like, so you might have a question about your own work right now, like, oh, will I ever finish this graphic novel that I've been working on for 6 months or something, right? The whole point of your presentation, if you actually personally want to get something out of it, is to try to put us into the mindset, preparing us to have the same question that you have. So if you just come in the beginning and say, hey guys, I'm Jeffrey, I don't know if I'm ever going to finish this graphic novel. We don't have any idea why or what kind of work you're doing or what might make it difficult. But if you present us the whole thing and then ask your question, we'll be like, oh, this is actually a really complicated thing to finish because of X, Y, and Z, or, we'll get more into it and more kind of be more understanding about it. So I would recommend, this is kind of one narrative, right? Mm-hmm. Welcome yourself, talk about something, ask a question that we've been prepared to think about. But of course, that's not the only way, right? You could, of course, just do another classic sort of presentation, which in the beginning you give the hook, right? You hook them with something, So in the beginning, you could say like, like, my notebook is completely empty, right? That's a good hook, right? For example, everyone would be like, oh fuck, oh shit, this isn't gonna go so well, right? But then somehow in the middle, you prove that might not be the case, right? So you might trick everybody, and then in the middle you actually talk about what it is that you're actually doing, right? Why was the notebook empty? Why did you trick everybody? Something like that. Maybe you brought the opacity down on everything, and you turn it back up. You could kind of get into that, and then you can show your work. And then in the end, you say, oh, by the way, my name is Jeffrey, and I like to do this, and so on and so forth. So these are actually two common modes of presentation that you see out there in the world, is like intro, talk about something, ask a question to the audience, intro, hook, reveal the magic trick, use that to get people's interest to talk about something, and then finally tell people who you are and what you're all about. So leading with the subject is also an interesting way of doing this. And you can see it's almost the opposite narrative, but they both kind of work. And so even though you might say there's different content here, right? If these things are the contents, right, of the presentation, we're still operating under the same structure of kind of 1, 2, 3, beginning, middle, end. So you can think of this as kind of the format, and the content being, this or this, and you can come up with your own form of content to go into that format.
Mm-hmm. I wonder too if there's kind of like a meta level at the beginning, is almost the step that I think a lot of people skip, is just actually looking at your notebook, kind of objectively, and
Totally.
seeing what the content of it is, and then you've got different ways to present it. So it's almost like you could start off with like a narrative linear time thing, like, well, I started off with this, then I made this, then I made this, then I made this. That can be really dull.
You mean going chronologically through everything?
Yeah, but it could be interesting if you find something out about yourself in that process that you're presenting to us. So that way you're presenting kind of like this, like a narrative of discovery. So I think if you were just to say, well, this day I drew an apple, and the next day I drew a carrot, and the next day I drew a snake, the end, we'd be like, okay, it's not the worst thing we've ever heard, but maybe if it was like, it's about the discovery of something in your interests, You know, it's like, well, I started off taking these pictures of trains, and then I started drawing trains, and then I ended up by making a little modular train set or something, or whatever. But like, if you can kind of look at the linear chronology and then turn it into a story of something that happened to you in the process, that can be really cool. Especially, you might not necessarily know what the story is until you sat down to look at the notebook. You know, then it becomes kind of like a, you know, yeah, exactly. There you go.
Right. The kind of discovery, you know, first I got into trains, then I got into planes, then I got into Elon Musk, or became Elon Musk.
I became
kind of thing.
Elon Musk.
So like introducing yourself at the end. But yeah, that's another classic sort of a great structure to think about. Like, look at what's in your notebook now, think about it chronologically, and do that anyway, right? Whether your presentation has a different structure or not. Try to think of, okay, what was I into? What were the initial problems, or what was I doing? What did I do after that as a result? And then where am I at now? That's kind of a nice way to think about it. I mean, of course, we all have that narrative. That's kind of the default, you know, that's time, basically. Time happens, and then things happen because of what happened before. So that's kind of the sort of default way to present. But actually doing that, kind of presenting your notebook to yourself before you come up with a more interesting narrative to present with, is I think what you're talking about, Miles, right? Like actually trying to make this structure happen for you, and then carving an interesting path through it to create a presentation.
Yeah, you're overlaying a narrative, because as humans, we like that story aspect. So in the audience, we like to hear about what you're saying as a story. And I think school has kind of damaged a lot of us by, I think, having us present things in a way that's like, oh my God, like I got this stupid assignment that I had to do, and I did the assignment, and here's me showing that I did the assignment. And that's like not what we're going for here. You're not trying to prove to us that you somehow did something that we wanted you to do. It's more like, what did you do? You know, and that question, we might have done something already, but not necessarily know the answer to what did I just do. I did it, but I haven't really thought about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I was talking to I was talking to one of my students in my digital painting class earlier this week, and they were telling me about we were talking about Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. Some of you in this class have probably seen those before. It's kind of a famous sort of example. But the one thing that I pointed out to my student that I thought maybe they weren't really aware of is that when you look at these sort of Da Vinci notebooks, I'll just find a couple samples here. You'll see a lot of a very high level of organization, right? So when you look at these pages, what you're looking at kind of feels a little bit more like visiting a web page than it does looking at what you might expect to be in someone's journal today, right? They're really well structured, and they're kind of, you know, they're done in ink, and things are kind of thought about, and the thinking is kind of bracketed off in different places. So there's a kind of graphical structure here. And so I was basically explaining that the main reason why these notebooks are so structured is because there was nothing else you could use to present stuff back then. So like the idea that like you would have some ideas, you know, an idea about a dodecahedron or whatever this shape is. I'm not sure I don't know, maybe someone can tell me what this is. Pentahedron? Not sure. But but you know, the idea that you might have some ideas and then you want to tell people about those ideas, it's like you have to write a letter, you have to open up your notebook and like explain the idea and like point to stuff. So like this whole kind of PowerPoint presentation thing used to just happen like in this handwritten form. And so the idea that your notebook itself is just a thing for you is kind of a newer thing, like a newer idea, you know. But like this sort of format of like notebook, sketchbook has been used in the past to sort of, you know, both be a way to think about things, but also be a way to present things, you know. And often when lecturers will give lectures, the whole point is that they're working. This is kind of like an old, maybe this kind of Harry Potter, you know, think of like Harry Potter University style kind of world. So like the professor at the school gives a lecture on like their current work. The lecture they give is basically reading from their notebooks. Eventually their notebooks have an editor that they work with, and then that's how a professor would get like published, or like how like a textbook might come out. You see what I'm saying? So this idea of like keeping a notebook, using that notebook to draw ideas from and present from, and then eventually turning that into some other project, right, in which that knowledge doesn't really change anymore, is kind of, I would say, kind of what this is all about. And I think that's one of the, probably one of the most interesting things about using new software like Figma, is that Figma has like these drawing features, right? Like, you know, Illustrator and these other graphical features, but also don't ignore the fact that it has this presentation feature where you can turn things into slides. And so the software is really designed as like personal/team notebook, plus you can present stuff with it. You don't have to go to PowerPoint, right? And so Miles and I are actually going to talk to you about how to use some of that presentational stuff today, for those of you who might want to use it in your presentation, because it's kind of an interesting sort of aspect of Figma, is just this idea that you have your sort of document or your sort of creative space, and then you use that space as a presentation. It's funny, you know, it seems kind of new, but I guess with the Da Vinci notebooks, just looking at them, it's so old too, you know. But I think that there was this idea that happened when everyone got computers, which was kind of like, oh, paper now is just for like making a mess, and the computer is where we do the real work. But of course, at one point, paper is where you did the real work and could make a mess and present from and do everything from. So paper kind of was an operating system, you know, pen and paper, and now we have a different one, but we're still kind of getting back to where we were in terms of understanding kind of, okay, how to edit a document and then present the document, how to like dynamically, you know, sort of change things on the screen. Because paper is a really flexible material, you know, pen and paper, chalkboard, you can easily copy things, you can transfer things, everyone can record things that they're seeing, you know, it's very flexible. And most of our computational stuff isn't so flexible, you know, we're just starting to get there. So just, that's kind of maybe a bit of a meta conversation about, you know, thinking about the future of you giving presentations and understanding that a presentation isn't necessarily going to be something that you sit down and just make a bunch of slides for, but a presentation is a kind of bottom-up thing where you're building knowledge, building material for yourself. And then at some point you realize, oh, I have a path in which I can present all this stuff. And when you realize that, trying to create the shortest distance possible between what you already have and then actually trying to share it is sort of where technology, and of course, good strategies for like presenting what's important come into play.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, and I think the presentation thing is really going to be, you know, as an EMDA major, I know a lot of you are EMDA majors, that's going to be something that's going to recur kind of with every class. And, you know, it's one of the big goals of the whole program is to get you comfortable being able to tell a story, you know, about yourself and about your work. Yep. So let's do it.
Great. So we have, do you have any questions about the presentation before we kind of jump in? We have some exercises to do today. No? All right, I think, yeah, we probably answered most basic questions.
Cool.
Okay, so Miles and I want to talk today about narrative. And those of you who kind of want to get set up to sort of work, and if you don't just want to follow along, I recommend creating a page in your Figma document. Oops. Create a page in a Figma document, and then just make a blank page. And then I want you to create 3 frames. And frames are, they're not boxes. They're a slightly different tool. And what a frame is it's really a way for you to kind of create, basically create a kind of a boundary or like a painting inside of your document. So like a viewing space, right? Because your document's kind of sort of sprawling and sort of infinite conceptually, but this allows you to sort of like give it a rectangle. And so if you were to ever export images that would be rectangles, you use frames in Figma. So if you want to export an illustration you made or a logo you made, you would put a frame around it to decide the proportions and then export an image that uses the frame's proportions. Does that make sense? So frames are kind of like a useful tool for like creating sections, but they're also the primary tool for how you might present something. So if we wanted to present the story of a square that slowly became a circle, we could, in each of these frames, let's get in here, kind of slowly bring this square to a more of a circular form, right? So here's like frame 1, frame 2, and frame 3. Maybe I'll just change the color a bit for each of these. And now when you were go and present, you would hit play. And because you have these frames and the frames are done in this order, you can hit the present button and you'll start with frame 1. And in here, you can scale it up. Let's see. Whoops. There we go. You can scale up your frame. So we have here frame 1, frame 2, and frame 3. And you can use your arrow keys to jump back and forth. And you can press R to restart the sequence if you like. Now there are some interactive features, so you can actually create buttons in Figma and do like nonlinear storytelling and kind of do like choose your own adventure type stuff. We're not really going to focus on that today, but rather what Miles and I are going to do is talk to you about using just this method of just being able to flip between different images, like 1, 2, 3. How can you tell an interesting story that isn't a story of isn't a verbal story, but is a visual story? And so last class we talked about, doing a 2-frame animation or doing a walk cycle. Those are ways of thinking about very small moments in time, not even something we would consider a moment, a split second, right? Before animators knew how to really do a walk cycle, we actually didn't really know what that looked like. We had to have those photos, those sort of Edward Muybridge photos of a horse galloping and of people sort of running and stuff, right? We really needed to be able to see things at a split second before we could reproduce them. And so that's kind of what last class was about. But this class is like, imagine thinking about a bigger time scale, right? Imagine if you had only had 3 slides, but you had to talk about something a bit longer, right? That might take place over an hour or over 10 minutes, or maybe even over 1,000 years. How could you tell a visual story using a certain set of images? So we're going to go over some strategies for doing that. All right, just 1 second here. Let me get back to the Figma document. So let us know if you have any questions, or if you have trouble setting up these frames. So anyway, yeah, make a new page, and then you go to the frame tool. And once you go to the frame tool, you can just draw a box like this. But if you want to create a box of a certain size, then if you hold down the Shift key, you can create a perfect square. That's what I did to create these frames. Or you can go ahead and just edit the width and height of your box here. You can always unlink them to create a rectangle. And I would recommend for this exercise that you just pick a size for your frame and then keep them all the same size and just draw 3 in order. And you can always create a new page like this and grab your frames from that page and put them on the next page if you want to do the exercise again. But keeping these little narratives separate, or thinking about each page as arriving at a 3-frame sort of narrative, might be a good way to think about this exercise. All right, so there's a few things that that we want to kind of start off talking about. I guess maybe the first thing, Miles, would be to talk about abstraction.
Yeah.
Or maybe we can talk about like visual detail and stuff. So before we even start to draw or think about how we might tell a story with 3 images, like maybe we could think about, okay, how detailed would that story be, or what do we actually use to tell the story?
Mm-hmm.
And you were going to bring up this interesting diagram. I don't know if you have it on you.
I think I've got it right here. Let me, where'd it go? 2, 1. Yeah. Yeah, here's a couple images here. I'll pull them up and share them. La-di-dee, la-di-do. Okay, share screen. So this is from a book called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. And it kind of, it's a way to start thinking, oh, this is a low res image, sorry. But let's get fuzzy. It's a way of starting to think about the nature of abstraction and representation and like naturalism. So on one end, you know, you have this, the naturalistic face. That's almost like a photograph, you know, and so what are they, you know, we could start by thinking about what are the characteristics that make something a naturalistic representation, like a photograph. So we're all looking at each other on Zoom right now using this photographic technology. And so what is it that makes us look like the guy on the, I don't know if that's the left or the right, that side of the image versus the little kind of smiley face image, you know, on the other side. And so what are some of the things that we're noticing here? Does anyone want to just, what makes this image, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this image over here look the way it does, the photographic image?
The amount of detail.
Yeah, but what do we mean by detail? The
Like the
amount,
shading.
quantity. Okay, quantity. That's good. Yeah. And you, well, I'm sorry, what else? I interrupted you there. What else did you say?
The shading.
Yeah, shading. So in shading, we could mean like this representation of light and dark, right? So we have a range of values. So when we talk about light and dark, we talk about values. And so that's one of the things we saw that digital imagery can account for pretty nicely in terms of breaking that down into a numerical scale, the values, you know, like where white is one end of the scale, black is the other end of the scale, and depending how much memory you allocate, you could break that down into a series of discrete steps that are probably be better than what the human eye can perceive. Yeah, good. So light and dark, quantity of detail, anything else?
It's kind of hard to tell if they're smiling or what their emotion is. You know, like it's like, are they smirking, or, you know what I mean? That I can't really tell what they're, it's maybe ambiguous.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
you know?
ambiguity. That's nice. Like Mona Lisa, right? Like the famous Mona Lisa, like that's supposed to be this like, what are they thinking? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they amused? Are they irritated? Are they, there's all this kind of like, complexity to, you know, open to interpretation. Nuance. Yeah, great. Yeah, good. I mean, that's great. So we have this, and so one way to talk about it is like the idea of continuous tone, that the way our eyes perceive things is that our eyes are really designed, or they're kind of evolved rather, to our eyes will perceive this really subtle nuance of color and value. We're really good at detecting things like motion. We're talking about static images here, so we're not so concerned about motion in this case, but like we've got this really subtle perception of things. Now, if we compare that, how is that different from the image all the way on the right? We'll just call it the right, of the more of the 2 dots and a line face. How would what would we say is different about those two images?
Well, one on the left is photographic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's made by light, or even if it's drawn, it seems
Yeah.
like drawn from a photograph.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the one on the right is graphic.
Yeah, written.
No
And
photo.
graphic means like what? Like graph is whistle graph, right? So a graph is a form of, I think it does, graphicist, whatever, like what does that mean? It means like drawn or made by the, I can't remember anyway. But you know, like the idea that it's like a mark. The mark, we when we look at that, we're not fooled into thinking, oh, this is an actual representation of light and dark. It's like, no, there's a dot, there's another dot, and there's a line. So each of those marks has a distinct identity that it was made by a particular instrument that we can see. So we're not fooled. So when we see the letter A, when someone writes the letter A just out like Jeffrey was doing in his notebook, we're not going, oh my God, that looks just like the A that I saw in real life in Lithia Park, right? We go, no, it's just the letter A. So if someone writes the word THE, we don't go like, oh, whoa, that's the of the real the, right? It's just, the mark is a thing in and of itself, and that it is enough for it to be that thing in and of itself. It doesn't have to be a better version or a realistic version of something, because the realistic thing doesn't exist in a way. So it's like dot, dot, line, circle. And those are things that we could abstract them out. It'd be really easy for us to just draw, like we do in Figma, a circle. And it'd be like, okay. And then we could draw a dot, and we could draw a dot, and we could draw a line. And those things could be separate, then we could combine them to make a face. So they have this kind of graphic language that's separate. It's much more like an alphabet. So, and then you have this range. And this is the thing that I don't think people really think about very much, is the range and how these things are. You have a choice as an artist of where you're operating within the spectrum. You may or may not make the choice consciously, but a lot of problems arise, I think, in something like animation or in comics, where we're trying to do this. We're trying to do the thing on the left, when that's actually making what we're trying to do worse. It's like if you tried to write your notes like this, like I don't even know what that would be, right? Like in terms of like making like really shaded, carefully, you know, chiaroscuroed and like, you know, proportioned letters, it would be insane, right? I don't even know what that would be. It would be kind of like delusional or something. And then, but you have this choice.
There's
where you
I don't know if anyone, there's a really funny TikTok video of like taking notes in history class, and it's like it's basically a joke about this, which is like kind of like taking really beautiful handwritten notes.
Oh yeah.
And like adding flowers to everything, and then it zooms out and it's like the Holocaust,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just this funny joke about like, you know, the overdoing the, you know, the
Aesthetics.
beauty of your notes. Yeah. Yeah. It was a meme for a while. I thought it was pretty funny.
That's good.
Like the overly detailed note taking.
Yeah, we just want to kind of get it and move on. So this was cool. This was his pyramid that he came up. And I really like this. You know, you could be critical of it and try to, you know, probably have an alternative take. But what he's doing is he's posing like, okay, on one end of the pyramid, you would have this realism, what we talked about with the photography, you know, kind of realism, naturalism, trying to portray things as we tend to perceive them, or we think that we perceive them. So photography, you know, would be kind of on one end over here. And then on the other hand, he calls it the picture plane. And so that would be what we would call total flat. The picture plane is what we mean when we hear that term. It refers to like the thing on which you are creating the thing. So no matter how realistic a flat image is, it's always flat, right? So a photograph is still a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional world. So it's never fully realistic. So if you really focus on the picture plane, you're focusing on the thing itself, like the piece of paper that it's on. And so it's just that kind of like abstraction. So you would say like a square is just 4 lines on a piece of paper. A circle is a round line on a piece of paper. So it's that graphic thing that we talked about. But then on the other hand, you have, oh yeah, this is the way he defines it over here, is meaning. And by meaning, he says explicit meaning in terms of like we're really doing stuff that becomes like letters. That's something that we can literally read, and then it has a meaning. So if someone writes, you know, half of a curved circle this way, and then most of a triangle with a line through it, and then another line, and then half of a circle, and then a diagonal line that's car, and we go like, oh, that makes me think about all these different cars, you know. So that would be kind of on this other end. So I mean, I don't know if this smiley face thing down here or not smiley face, if that's really towards this or if it's towards this. You could argue, and like I said, this is like a thing you can discuss and think about on your own. But like, I think it's kind of a cool way to start to think about this. And so his point was that if you look at comics, there's quite a range, but really they tend to be clustered away from this kind of realism. And even something like, you know, Superman or the Vision, you know, like DC, Marvel Comics, that kind of thing, it's still a pretty stylized, you're still quite a ways away from something like a photograph. And one of the arguments he makes is that actually makes something like comics and animation, it makes it easier for us to identify with them because it's not very particular. That when you go back to this is like that guy, right? So it's really easy for us. None of us in this class look like this guy. So we say, oh, that's not me. We don't, it's harder for us to identify. But we all look at this and we're like, oh, that's me. You know? So it's easier for us to identify with someone like Charlie Brown or Snoopy or Lisa Simpson or something than it is for us to identify with like Julia Roberts or Brad Pitt or something in terms of like that kind of like visual identification. I do get mistaken for Brad Pitt a lot. It's true. But you got to deal with it. So anyway, that's kind of a way to start to think about abstraction. And the thing I liked about it is that in a way, you know, you think about characters that are kind of up here, they're almost more like lines or like language. But to me, that starts to get down here. So this feels almost arbitrary. I mean, this distinction here, but that's a story for another day, maybe.
Oh,
All right.
Which distinction is arbitrary?
Well, I was thinking like the picture plane and meaning. I guess the thing that's not
right.
arbitrary about it is that a circle or a square doesn't have a meaning ascribed to it. It's just that thing in and of itself, whereas the letter C has a meaning assigned to it, you know, as part of a particular graphic language. So that's what the point I think he's trying to make. That's totally valid.
Yeah. Yeah. One way of thinking about it is the sort of most abstract forms that we have are often things that connect other things or bind other things or bridge other things. So like triangle, square, circle, like often it's like things go inside a circle or they go in a square or on top of a square, right? So like the idea that like what are often called the primary forms, like the primary abstract forms, those are kind of used as like containers, building blocks, sections, regions, you know, thresholds between one thing or the other, like the frame of the comic, different frames, the page being a rectangle, right? So those things are kind of the things that are containers for meaning, right? Think of the film strip. The film strip is a circle, a primary form, and then within that circle, you have a long primary form, the rectangle, broken up into smaller rectangles. Is there any meaning there? We could talk about the meaning of that, but really, when we're talking about a film, we tend to want to talk about the stuff in the individual little rectangles, right? Yeah, the content. And so the idea here is like, you know, comics basically are powerful because they choose to sort of make their content sort of not completely real, right? But like they try to arrive at a specific meaning. And one of the problems with reality is that things can be really ambiguous, right? You don't always necessarily know what something means until you exaggerate or simplify it. And also it's harder to draw. It takes longer, right? So if you want to sort of tell a story or be flexible in your storytelling, then and be direct, then you want to find the right balance, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's kind of I think one of the bad things that happens to all of us, or most of us, is that when we're kids, everybody draws. You know, like we also say, like, as kids, everyone's funny. As a kid, I always think about that. Like, you know, everyone just kind of is like a kid, you know, like, yeah. And then at some point we get this feeling like, oh crap, like I don't know how to draw. And I remember I had this feeling very explicitly in second grade, where I was trying to draw this like baseball scene that I had in my head. And it was very clear what I wanted to convey. And then I drew it and it looked like I had this weird, like almost like out of body experience where I was like, wait, I just made something that looks like a little kid did it. This is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to actually make something that looked different than what I just made. And I didn't know what to do with that. Like, I was just really frustrated by that. Like I had this, and I think that happens to just about everybody, where you have this break where you're like, wait, like you go from like drawing just being a thing in and of itself to a thing that you're either good or bad at. And so I think the problem that a lot of us face is we're trying to do this on this, we're trying to do the reality side of the pyramid, but really that might have nothing to do at all with our thinking, with what we can do naturally. You know, it's like if I spent my whole life bemoaning the fact that I couldn't run a mile in under 4 minutes, that'd be kind of sad. It's like, dude, don't worry about it. It's not going to happen for you. Like you just don't have that capability. But like, get on with your life. Like, that's not, you don't have to be that person. It's not going to make your life better to be that person. You know, someone that can do that. It's not even that person.
Yeah, I think the real danger in misunderstanding, especially based, you know, what people might think of as being good at art, maybe in middle school or high school, is that if you look at this triangle, often people think art in general is the bottom left corner of the triangle.
Exactly.
And so I think the real danger there is that the person who realizes that they might not be able to run that 4-minute mile, like you're saying, Miles, might not be the best at depicting reality, for example. They never actually might have a full understanding of the whole picture. And that person who might not be good at that 4-minute mile might quit and give up on art, for example, when actually they could have been one of the best people at the other ends of the triangle.
Exactly.
You
Making
know?
all that money.
So it's like well, yeah, you know, they could have been they could be a genius at making simple meaning, but they'll never know because their whole model of art is based on being good versus being at the other corner. And so I think it's the kind of this common case where you see a lot of people give up early because they don't have a proper model for like how to do things or like what their capabilities might be. So it's a nice diagram to realize, to think about yourself in relationship to it.
That's great, because I think like, you know, I was joking about that just when you said that, because I think that's so beautifully put, Jeffrey. I mean, like, yeah, it's like you've got to find your place in this and flourish in that. But like, you think about like the most famous characters on here, they're all to the right. they're not the most reality based ones. You know, you look at like Mickey Mouse, Charlie Brown, Tintin, you know, is that Astro Boy, Scrooge McDuck, Felix, you know, all these characters that we Popeye that we know, they're all towards that end. So like, let yourself find that, you know, place that you can just do.
Totally. Yeah, and if you want to get heady about it, you can say the reason they're most famous is because they've been drawn more, because they take less time to draw. They're more memorizable, they're more recognizable, and so therefore they travel more across space and time. So the idea here being that if you can find the right balance in your artwork, then, you know, if the goal is to try to make something exist in the minds of other people, then of course you don't want to make it too complicated, right? You want to make make it easy in some way. I think Mickey Mouse is kind of a good kind of sort of interesting balance, right? Like Mickey Mouse, Charlie Brown, these are kind of the iconic characters, and they do seem to strike a nice balance between, like, you know, not being a square and not being a photograph.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but being way far on the edge of that, you know, almost being a square, you know, more close to a square than a photograph, which is kind of interesting to me.
Totally. And that's kind of the fun of it. That's the pleasure of it. I think that we all have that ability to kind of go, ooh, that's cool. Like, you know, like, oh, that's it. You know, Pokemon stuff has that same thing where it's like, oh, wait a minute. Like, I love this character. You know, and it's closer, like Jeffrey said, it's closer to like drawing a circle than it is to like sketching out like something in your life drawing class. So, cool.
Yeah, I've been really into Pokemon lately because my roommate bought all these new Pokemon cards.
Ooh,
and I haven't got them since I was little. So
Yeah.
I've been looking at the energy
nice
cards and stuff like that. Yeah, the illustrations on Pokemon cards are pretty amazing right now. And also the printing technology is pretty crazy too.
I personally prefer Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, pick your universe. But the cards have definitely evolved a lot.
Yeah,
Years,
it took me about like 7 years to fully learn all the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh.
All right, so I'm gonna show some notes again in my notebook, and I'm gonna describe this exercise to everyone, and then I'll kind of go through it. And so basically, we're gonna play a little game over the next 10 minutes or so. So we're gonna start, and the first thing you're going to do is pick a noun. So here's some examples: cloud, penguin, zombie, house, cat. So pick a noun or put a noun down on your notebook or write it in Figma or something like that. So you pick a noun, and then you're going to pick a theme or an action, like cry, eat, lift, push, copy. So you have a noun and a theme, and then you're going to make it into a visual sequence. So we're going to start with kind of, this is sort of the beginning, middle, and end. Beginning, middle, end. And so in the beginning, we want you to create, to be neutral. You know, the world is, everything is normal. Welcome to cloud, welcome to cat, that kind of thing. In the middle, we want you to have the event occur: crying, eating, lifting, pushing, copying, any verb that you can kind of think of, but write down the verb. And at the end is the aftermath, the reaction. What changed in the neutral environment as a result of this action, so to speak. So here's the whole sequence. And if you like, you can take a screenshot of this. I don't know if Miles, do you want to spotlight my video really quick?
Oh, what am I doing?
Do you have a spotlight? Yeah, or a spotlight, I think.
Oh,
Pin is just for, you should hit the 3 dots on my frame. Does it say spotlight?
Let's see, Jeffrey Scudder. I have pin, unpin, whoops.
Maybe we don't have spotlight in this meeting. That's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
It's cool. I will take a screenshot of it and then put it in the Zoom chat.
Oh, there it is.
Everybody can. Oh, you found it. Okay,
yeah.
Great. Yeah. So those of you can take a screenshot, and this is also a nice way of if you don't know how to take a screenshot on your computer, you know, we'll teach you how. But this is basically the set of instructions. Of course, here with nouns, you know, these are examples, but you can put anything you want. Although feel free to use the ones that we've given you because it might be kind of fun. Oh, thanks. GC put a PNG of it in the
Nice.
in the chat. And I'm actually going to go ahead and do this. And I was thinking that maybe we could. I'll set a timer for about 5 minutes. Or yeah, let's say 5 minutes on creating a sequence of 3 images: noun, action, reaction, and then we'll share a couple of them. And so the idea here is that I'd like you to use the frames in Figma. So draw it in Figma, try to use the frames, and we'll see how we can do it. So I have 3 frames here. I'll just kind of walk you through what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do a cloud, and the cloud is going to cry. And yeah, so I'm going to say cloud cries, and that's going to be kind of the title of this whole sequence here. And then maybe I want to just like fill out another one, to start with. I'll say, okay, this one's going to be zombie copies. And those of us who know, if a zombie wants to make a copy of itself, it usually bites someone in the neck. So that would be fun. But here's the basic idea, and just do one of them for now. Just do one. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll put on like a 5-minute timer. And those of you who are really used to doing drawing or something in another program, if you want to use layers or kind of do it in your own way, that's totally fine. But I just want those of you who want to practice using these frames in Figma to sort of give that a shot. So feel free to make the images however you like, but put them into a sequence so that we can flip through them digitally, if that makes sense. All right, 5 minutes on the clock, starting now. And I'll give you all some warnings. One thing that's nice about Figma is you can copy your lines over from one frame to the other. So for those of you who, you don't have to redraw everything, of course. But because you only have 3 images, it might be useful to redraw things too. All right, we got about 3 minutes left. All right, just a minute or so left. Those of you who are working in frames in Figma, there's some subtle things that I haven't talked about that I'll get to after this first exercise. All right, time is almost up here.
Oh no.
Are we on the wire?
We're on the wire. Coming down to it.
Yeah,
All
time's
right.
basically up.
Okay.
So we'll see if anybody wants to, if anyone wants to share. I'll share mine
right.
right off the bat. Give you guys an idea of what I had. Yeah, so mine was Cloud crying, basically. And so here's my first frame. And then the next frame, let me just set this up to. So first frame, Cloud is content, sad, big. Cloud stops and cries. Cloud is small, leaves with flowers being grown where the crying happened. That was kind of my idea. Now you can see it kind of, you can kind of maybe get a sense for how, as you flip through these, like, okay, you can get a sense for how the animation might work or how the little in-between moments might be filled in. And so it's not quite animation in the sense that it's like a 2-frame sort of onion skinned kind of thing. But it gets the story across, right? Some elements stay the same, some things kind of change. The things that change, you kind of know how they changed. So that's really what to kind of keep in mind here. All right, anyone else want to share?
I got one.
All right, let's see.
So I had written down for my noun Foog, which I guess is the name of this character. And the verb was taste. So here we go. Let's see. Whoops.
Oh, go to options on the top right, Miles.
Okay.
And yeah, and then click scale down or up to fill.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So, Foog. Oops. So I guess we have something got intervened there. So I got to go back to my frames. So taste, and then, oh, I think I know what happened. Okay, I see what happened. All right, so taste, yeah, and then he's been overwhelmed by love.
Yeah, so one of the things there is you have frame 4, 5, and 6, but frame 1, 2, and 3 kind of got messed up in the ordering.
Yeah, and I think that it was taking a little longer for it to load. So I think that's what happened actually. So,
oh, gotcha. Oh, yeah.
So it's good to practice. It's like now I know that it takes, I think it actually worked fine. So I had these, and then I went to, when I went to present, it actually works. Because I've got 6 frames down there, but they were in order.
Oh, gotcha.
Wait,
yeah.
So it's fine. Yeah, but that's the thing that you realize when you practice something. It's like, oh, I got to be cool about that. So,
yeah. Yeah, and also the way that Figma determines the ordering of frames is either just based on when you created them or the order in the sort of layers kind of panel on the left.
Yeah.
And then if you really want to get crazy, you can define that order by drawing lines between them and stuff like that. Looks great. Anybody else want to share?
I can
share.
go.
Do it.
Oh.
Four-minute
Who's that?
miles.
Did we have a winner from that exchange?
I'll do it,
Okay, James.
and then they can go. This screen. Is it going?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So I drew a little house with like the shape things, and I drew a little doorknob. And then there's some wind, and it breaks the windows of the house. And then all the glass falls down, and now the house looks empty.
Oh, nice. I like the triangles as glass pieces is pretty funny.
Be great.
Yeah.
Great. Is that the
nice.
broken window theory? Does everybody know the broken window theory?
No.
That's scary.
The broken window theory is the idea that if your neighborhood has broken windows, then crime is more likely to occur.
Oh.
It's basically just a psychological theory that, like, you know, is basically if you're in a place in which things seem like crime has happened, you know what I mean? Like if you walk into a grocery store and everybody's taking things off the shelves and walking out, it's more likely that that activity will, you know, keep occurring, or that you would feel okay with doing that too.
You know, if you go back to that, James, I just had a quick thought. If you, that this is a great example of, like, as an animator, I would probably go back, like, this is like the way that we put an idea down isn't the way that it necessarily shows up. I was thinking like the triangles are really cool in this. And so as an animator, I might go, oh yeah, maybe what I'll do is if you go back to the second frame now, say like, well, maybe here I would have these be triangles, you know, already have those triangle shapes there so that when they fall apart, they would already kind of do that. Just as like maybe that's a cool animation design thing, but a lot of times that occurs to you later. It occurs to you after you've gotten the idea down. So that's cool that you got the idea down. And the other thing I love about this is the wind shapes. And that again could be something like, oh, okay, cool. I can go make something really like these kind of curly, cool things. But this is great. I mean, so we always say in animation is like, get the idea down. Like, you don't have to solve it all out. Just get it down. And you'll, in trusting yourself to instinctively put something down, you'll get the main idea that we can then go back and, you know, do our fancy design to later. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I really personally like how each window has its own gust of wind.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, I think it's like, you know, like that could be something where it's like you could go back and think like, oh, we should fix that. It should just be one gust of wind. But when I think about it being animated, I'm like, oh, it would be so funny to just see the separate two gusts like breaking each window. Yeah. Yeah, that would be kind of a beautiful image. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or they could even come in sequence, you know, like bam, bam,
one and two. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, like in my brain, I like saw it as it was like a targeted attack on the windows.
Yeah, like the simultaneous.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I really like that. Reminds me of Arfin House. There's a old Flash cartoon called Arfin House. Some people probably don't know it here.
I don't know that.
It's of an era of Flash cartoons where people tried to make the worst possible Flash cartoons on purpose. Just like by Googling for JPEGs and making their characters out of a square and making sure the mic sounded really bad, you know, using all stock music. So Arfin House is kind of one of my favorite things.
That's great.
A lot of Windows break in it, and they use sounds from Counter-Strike, like, you know, default video game sounds for breaking windows and stuff. So it's like you can tell where everything comes from, which is kind of what's nice about you know, it's a collage. Yeah. So those of you who want to check it out, you should check out Arfin House.
That's cool. Definitely check it out.
So we have some more people to share. Any other sharers?
I'd like to share.
I'll go.
Okay.
Olivia, why don't you go?
Yeah. You see it?
There it is.
Oh, I didn't have my pen, so I used my mouse and it was pretty bad. But it's a cat and it's hungry and it sees a fish over the water. And so, let's see, how do we get to the next frame? So he swims and he turns into a mermaid. The end.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Nice.
That's all.
That's great. Yeah, that's like a big timeline.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny thing to think about, right? Like in comics, it's like how much time goes by between the panels. You don't know. It's not necessarily, I mean, you control that as the artist. In animation, we're more limited by since the frames are going by mechanically. But in a book, or you can how much time passes between a page or between a panel.
Yeah. Yeah, Olivia, you kind of presented like the sort of movie trailer excitement version. Like, often the trick in movie trailers is to like show all the cool images that happen, but not tell you how anything is happening or like what happens after what. They're just like, right? And so it's like, these things are supposed to happen and in some kind of sequence, but then you're being shown them like, these like amazing moments happen. And then the movie is usually a lot worse somehow, but it's just, the logic of a movie trailer is to like make these big jumps,
I figure he probably can't eat fish after he turned into one.
Yeah, mermaids aren't exactly pescatarians, I guess. Thanks, Olivia. Who else?
I can go.
Share. Oh,
Quinn, let's
okay.
go.
Oh, cool. Sick.
No,
Oh, and Stephen. Sorry, Stephen, you've been wanting to go. I know. Sorry.
Hopefully screen sharing works for me. Okay, sweet. Awesome. So, is it going? Is it all good? Okay, sick. I did penguin and coffee. So here is my penguin.
Oh, it still hasn't come in for me yet.
Oh.
It looks like it's wanting to. It's trying.
I need a new laptop so bad. So
maybe Quinn. Oh, there it is. We see it now.
Okay, sick. So I did penguin and coffee. This is my penguin. Please work. Please work. There is.
Oh, nice.
And there's the coffee. And that is my penguin mitosis.
That's cool.
Great. Let's see the metal image again.
I really want.
It's very pretty. Oh yeah, you mean the middle image has a tattoo?
That's cool.
Yeah, that would be pretty interesting, I think. Yeah, that's kind of a perfect example of of a keyframe. Thinking about like if you were animating a show, this is what you would send to the interns, and they would animate everything in between.
Yes, exactly.
Or this is what or this is what a computer might do for you very soon. Within the next 5 to 10 years, who here has used like digital tweening before, where you sort of tween between one image to another, or like you animate a ball moving?
Yes.
Right, on a timeline. So that stuff right now is pretty much like one-to-one mapping, right? Like you can kind of just move an object or change a number, like that might represent the position of an object. But with machine learning, we're going to start to see some more advanced versions of that pretty soon that use a lot of like pre-existing data models. So the idea that you might, in a couple of years, be able to draw just this part and actually see the result happen, it's close to kind of what you would animate yourself, is not very far off. So it's kind of something interesting, an interesting reason to learn these principles now, I think. All right, Steven, let's see.
Right, so I did 2, and both are not digital because my computer was off.
That's all right. Let's take a look.
But I spent more time on the top one than the bottom one, so I just need to, I can just use my video for this. That's my ceiling. The bottom one was inspired by just when you're talking about zombies, because I was already working on another one, so I just did a really fast zombie, like,
Oh yeah, I see.
So that one was fast. The other one I actually spent more time on, which was this, which is more.
And which one is? And what is that one?
That one is an ambiguous man's death.
Oh, cool. Could you turn your phone a little bit?
Like that way?
Perfect.
There we go. Yeah.
Uh-huh. An ambiguous man's death.
Yeah. I didn't want to like do it super explicitly because that's not as fun.
In the zombie one, what's happening in that zombie one?
That was really rushed, so it's kind of hard to tell.
Oops. Freezing a bit. Looks like the zombie's getting shot up.